When they finally tore down the walls, the smell was the least of their worries. Inside, meticulously sewn children's clothes, some woven with human hair, were carefully sealed over fragments of bone. Who would stitch such horrifying secrets into the very fabric of a home? And why did the whispers from those walls only grow louder years after the last resident vanished? Could you ever live in a house knowing what its walls might hide? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're ready to uncover the darkest corners of human history, hit that subscribe button for Host of Silence. To understand the true terror woven into the Ventrell family's legacy, we must go back to their silent arrival in New Orleans, 1887. The oppressive humidity of a New Orleans summer clung to everything, a thick, suffocating shroud that magnified the putrid stench emanating from the derelict Ventrell mansion on Esplanade Avenue. It was the summer of 1968, and the city, in a fit of urban renewal, had finally condemned the long-abandoned structure, deeming it an eyesore and a hazard. Yet, as the demolition crew began their work, a different kind of hazard, one infinitely more insidious, began to reveal itself. The odor, initially dismissed as the stale breath of decay from decades of neglect, intensified with each splintered plank and crumbling brick. It was a sweet, cloying reek reminiscent of forgotten floral arrangements mingled with something far more visceral and unsettling, a metallic tang, a whisper of something organic and deeply, terribly wrong. It permeated the very fabric of the humid air, clinging to clothes, seeping into the lungs of the workers, a constant nauseating reminder that this was no ordinary demolition. The crew, a hardened group accustomed to the grime and unexpected finds of old city structures, found themselves increasingly uneasy. Their usual boisterous banter dwindled, replaced by a tense silence punctuated only by the groan of machinery and the unsettling creak of the old house surrendering its secrets. It was during the dismantling of the south wall, a section notoriously resistant to their efforts, that the true nature of the mansion's macabre legacy began to emerge. As the plasterboard gave way, revealing the skeletal lath beneath, a void within the wall's cavity came into view. Not the expected dust or forgotten wiring, but a neatly concealed, almost deliberately placed bundle. The foreman, a grizzled man named Elias Thorne, initially thought it was old insulation, but the texture was wrong. He reached in, his fingers brushing against a soft yet strangely resilient material. When he pulled it free, the afternoon sun, filtering through the dust-filled air, illuminated a grotesque tableau. It was a piece of fabric, small and faded, clearly intended for a child's garment. But it was not merely old cloth. It was stitched painstakingly and meticulously, with other scraps of similar delicate textiles, a miniature sleeve here, a fragment of a collar there, forming a crude, unsettling patchwork. And woven into the seams, securing the macabre quilt, were strands of dark, coarse human hair. A collective gasp rippled through the small group of workers who had gathered. Thorne, his face pale beneath the grime, carefully extracted more bundles from the wall's hidden recesses. Each was a variation on the same horrifying theme. Tiny shoes, their leather cracked and dry, stuffed with what appeared to be dried flowers and tightly bound with more human hair. Small wooden toys, crudely carved and stained, their hollowed-out eyes filled with what looked like dried blood, also sealed with intricate weaves of hair. Fragments of lace, infant bonnets, and even a miniature porcelain doll's head, its painted smile mocking, all incorporated into these disturbing hair-bound effigies. The air grew thick with unspoken horror, the cloying odor now identifiable as the scent of decay that had been unnaturally preserved, a testament to the decades these objects had been entombed. The discoveries were not random detritus. They were deliberate, ritualistic placements, each bundle a silent, chilling testament to an unspeakable act. The Ventrell mansion was not merely old, it was a tomb, its walls a meticulously organized repository of forgotten horrors. To comprehend the full scope of the darkness unearthed that sweltering summer day, one must journey back in time, to the year 1887, when the house first became known as the Ventrell residence. New Orleans then as now, was a city of contradictions. Vibrant yet decaying, opulent yet impoverished, a melting pot of cultures simmering under the relentless southern sun. Its streets buzzed with the cacophony of commerce, the mournful strains of nascent jazz, and the hushed whispers of ancient superstitions. It was into this charged atmosphere that Rosalia and Pietro Ventrell arrived, two figures shrouded in a mystery that deepened with every passing day of their residency. They appeared without fanfare, seemingly from nowhere, their origins as obscure as their intentions. Records of their arrival were sparse, almost non-existent, as if they had materialized from the very mist that often clung to the bayou. Pietro, a man of imposing height and gaunt features, possessed an unsettling stillness, his eyes, dark and deep-set, rarely met those of others. He moved with a deliberate, almost spectral, grace. Rosalia, however, was the true enigma. She was a woman perpetually cloaked in black, her attire oddly heavy for the humid New Orleans climate. Most strikingly, her face was invariably obscured by a thick, black lace veil that descended from a wide-brimmed hat, never once lifted in public, even during the most sweltering days. The veil rendered her features an eternal mystery, allowing only the faintest outline of a nose or the glint of an unseen eye to escape its dark embrace. This constant concealment, coupled with their pronounced Italian accents and their almost complete lack of engagement with the local community, marked them as outsiders from the moment they set foot in the city. Their acquisition of the sprawling three-story mansion on Esplanade Avenue only added to the growing whispers. The house, already old and bearing the scars of generations, had stood vacant for years, its previous occupants having fled under circumstances vaguely described as unfortunate. The Ventrells purchased it outright in cash, a transaction handled with unusual speed and discretion. There were no real estate agents involved, no public notices, and no witnesses to the exchange of deeds beyond the bare minimum required by law. The money, a substantial sum for the era, was presented in crisp, foreign banknotes, further fueling speculation about their true wealth and how it had been amassed. Within days of the purchase, the mansion, once a familiar, if dilapidated, landmark, seemed to recede into itself, its windows becoming dark, unseeing eyes. The Ventrells moved in quickly, with no visible furniture or possessions, as if they needed only the walls themselves to begin their peculiar existence. The family's composition was another point of persistent uncertainty. While it was generally understood that Rosalia and Pietro were a married couple, the question of children remained unanswered. Local gossips, ever keen observers of new arrivals, reported fleeting glimpses of small figures within the mansion's shadowy interior, but the number, age, and even the gender of these presumed offspring varied wildly in neighborly accounts. Some claimed to have seen one child, a boy, others, a girl, still others, 2 or even 3 indistinct forms flitting behind veiled windows. The Ventrells offered no clarity, never publicly acknowledging any children, nor were any seen entering or leaving the house. It was as if the children, if they existed, were as reclusive as their parents, or perhaps, existed only in the fleeting, uncertain periphery of observation. Rosalia's reclusiveness was particularly striking. She never left the mansion, and her presence was rarely felt even within its grounds. When Pietro would occasionally venture out for supplies, a rare and hurried trip into the city, Rosalia remained behind the impenetrable walls. The few tradesmen or delivery persons who dared to approach the imposing front door reported a chilling silence, often a long wait, before the door would creak open just enough for Rosalia's veiled figure to emerge, a hand extended to receive or exchange, never revealing more than the bare minimum of her person. She spoke in a low, almost inaudible murmur, her voice raspy as if unused to prolonged conversation. The most unsettling aspect of her domestic routine, however, was her insistence on keeping certain rooms within the mansion perpetually locked. Whispers circulated among the infrequent visitors, a delivery boy, a census taker, that entire wings of the house were sealed off, their doors bolted from the outside as if to contain something or someone within. The reasons for this were never offered, only assumed to be part of the Ventrells' profound eccentricity. As the months turned into years, the oddities of the Ventrell household escalated from mere eccentricity to a source of genuine local unease. The mansion, even in the oppressive New Orleans heat, remained unnaturally dark, its heavy drapes always drawn, its gas lamps rarely lit. But it was the sounds that truly unsettled the immediate neighborhood. In the dead of night, when the city's usual nocturnal symphony of crickets, distant music and carriage wheels quieted, a different rhythm would emerge from the Ventrell house. A persistent rhythmic whirring and clacking, unmistakable as the sound of a sewing machine, would begin, often lasting until the first hint of dawn. It was an insistent, almost relentless sound, suggesting not a hobby, but an industrious, perhaps even feverish pursuit. Interspersed with the mechanical whirring were other, more disturbing sounds, low, guttural murmurs like prayers or incantations, whispered in a language no one recognized, a tongue that seemed to twist and coil around itself, and occasionally, a thin, almost ethereal wailing easily dismissed as the wind through the old house, but too distinct, too plaintive to be merely atmospheric. Then came the disappearances. Initially it was small domestic animals. A neighbor's cat, known for its nightly wanderings, vanished without a trace. Then a dog, a sturdy terrier that had always returned home. The disappearances were sporadic at first, easily attributed to the dangers of the urban environment, but as the pattern continued, a chilling suspicion began to take root. The disappearances were localized, almost exclusively occurring within a few blocks of the Ventrell mansion. Small livestock from a nearby yard, particularly chickens and a goat, also went missing, their pens found undisturbed, as if the animals had simply evaporated. The fear escalated when the disappearances extended beyond the animal kingdom. A street urchin, known for his audacious attempts to sneak into backyards for discarded scraps, vanished one humid evening. Days later, a traveling peddler, last seen making his rounds near Esplanade Avenue, was never heard from again. There were no bodies, no clues, only the gaping void of absence. The police, overwhelmed by the city's myriad crimes, dismissed these cases as typical vagrancy or flight, but the local residents knew better. They watched the Ventrell mansion, its windows like sightless eyes, its silence more menacing than any sound, and a collective, unspoken dread settled over the neighborhood. The house became a place to avoid, its very shadow seeming to carry a chill even in the height of summer, a dark monument to a family that had arrived from the unknown and brought with them an inexplicable, creeping horror that festered in the heart of New Orleans. The strange odor, the hidden bundles, the whispered prayers, the relentless sewing machine, and the vanished lives, all coalesced into a chilling prelude, a macabre overture to a story that would remain untold for over 80 years, until the very walls themselves finally screamed their secrets. The Ventrell mansion stood as a monument to decay and oppressive secrecy, a hulking presence perpetually shadowed on the outskirts of New Orleans' vibrant, humid heart. Its architecture recoiled from light, sagging eaves and gabled roofs forming a perpetual frown. The once red brickwork was mottled with green moss and black streaks, appearing diseased. Many windows, perpetually shuttered or obscured by thick grime, offered only glimpses into perpetual twilight. Inside, the air hung thick and stagnant, a cloying blend of dust, mildew, and an ancient scent permeating every surface, clinging to fabrics and woodwork. Sunlight, fractured and weak, penetrated the gloom through cracked panes, painting fleeting, spectral patterns across crumbling wallpaper that peeled in leprous flakes from damp walls. Everywhere, subtle signs of neglect intertwined with chilling strangeness. Crucifixes, once emblems of faith, hung askew, warped and twisted, casting distorted shadows that danced with the slightest shift in the oppressive stillness. They were symbols of faith contorted, piety twisted into something profane. Certain upper rooms were sealed with chilling finality. Doors, not merely closed but nailed shut with heavy, oxidized spikes and painted matte black, spoke not of disuse but deliberate confinement, secrets entombed within the house's foundations. This pervasive claustrophobia was a psychological pressure, an invisible weight stifling breath and thought for inhabitants and lingering souls alike. The oppressive quiet was broken only by the aging structure's creaks and groans, sounds that, in the absolute stillness, took on a sentient quality. Within these suffocating confines resided Rosalia Ventrell, as enigmatic as the mansion itself. Her physical presence was faded and indistinct, her face often obscured by shadows or wispy, silver hair. Yet her existence was defined by a singular, consuming obsession: sewing. From dawn until deep night, long after New Orleans gas lamps extinguished, the rhythmic hum of her treadle sewing machine, often with faint needle clicks, was the only consistent sound from the house, a monotonous, relentless pulse in the deathly quiet. Rosalia worked with feverish intensity, her skeletal, dye-stained fingers moving with practiced, mechanical precision, a blur over intricate patterns. Rare fabrics, shimmering silks, light-absorbing brocades, unsettlingly pale linens, arrived, their vibrant colors swallowed by the gloom, only to be transformed by Rosalia's tireless hand. She fashioned garments with uncanny skill, intricate stitches forming bewildering patterns, each seam flawless, each buttonhole meticulous. Her prodigious output testified to inhuman dedication. Yet, for all her prodigious output, not a single item of clothing ever left the Ventrell mansion for sale. No merchant received her wares, no fashion house displayed her creations. This peculiar fact, initially a mere curiosity, gradually took on a sinister implication. What purpose did this endless, meticulous creation serve if not commerce? Whispers among infrequent deliverymen and distant neighbors suggested a darker, more personal and ultimately more macabre intent behind Rosalia's ceaseless industry. Her sewing was not a craft. It was a ritual, a silent, laborious dedication to an unknown, unsettling purpose, a private liturgy. The Ventrell household's unsettling nature extended beyond Rosalia, reaching back into its forgotten history. Old photographs, found years later amongst the mansion's scattered detritus during an eventual reluctant inventory, offered chilling glimpses into its past. These were not proud family portraits, but hidden artifacts, tucked away to conceal their existence. One particular daguerreotype, faded and brittle, its silver surface tarnished, depicted a child, gender indeterminate due to archaic clothing and poor clarity, staring directly into the lens. The child's eyes, however, were not open. They were sewn shut, meticulously stitched with fine dark thread, a grotesque parody of sleep, a horrifying mimicry of repose. The image was not a trick of light or photographic defect. It was a deliberate, horrifying modification, a testament to incomprehensible cruelty, a profound violation. This single artifact, discovered long after by investigators poring over the remnants of the Ventrell legacy, cast a retroactive pall over every rumor and suspicion clinging to the Ventrell name. It transformed vague unease into concrete horror, suggesting depravity deeper than eccentricity, hinting at a lineage of disturbing practices. The local populace, especially those whose properties bordered the vast, unkempt Ventrell estate, had long spoken of the house in hushed, fearful tones. Their accounts, often dismissed as superstitious folklore in a city steeped in it, nevertheless painted a consistent, disturbing picture defying rational explanation. Residents of Creole Street and Esplanade Avenue, whose backyards abutted the mansion, reported inexplicable phenomena emanating directly from the blighted structure. Faint, indistinct whispers emanated from the Ventrell walls, not human voices, but something ethereal, like rustling leaves or a forgotten spirit sigh-trapped within the mortar. These auditory disturbances were often accompanied by an inexplicable temperature drop, even on the hottest New Orleans nights. More alarming were reports of windows, long thought sealed or locked, found inexplicably ajar or swinging open at night, their old hinges groaning, only to be discovered closed and secured again by morning, as if by an unseen hand. These were not casual effects of wind or decay, they were perceived as deliberate acts, as if the house possessed a malevolent consciousness, breathing and observing, its structure a conduit for unseen forces toying with the fragile veil between worlds. The cumulative effect was a profound, creeping dread that settled over the neighborhood, a silent, collective acknowledgement of something deeply wrong with the Ventrell place. Amidst these unnerving occurrences, a tangible, deeply disturbing pattern emerged, linked directly to Rosalia's solitary industry. Children's garments, small and intricately detailed, began to appear in the most unlikely and unsettling locations around the Ventrell property. They were discovered tucked into narrow, moss-covered crevices of ancient oak trees bordering the estate, or wedged between crumbling garden walls that marked the perimeter. Most disturbingly, some were meticulously sewn directly into the mansion's exterior masonry, their delicate fabrics fused with the rough stone as if grown there organically, or absorbed by the house's substance. Each garment, from tiny lace-adorned dresses to miniature wool trousers, was embroidered with symbols defying interpretation. They were not religious iconography, alchemical signs, or any known script. They were arcane, unsettling patterns, meticulously rendered in various hues, suggesting a cryptic language known only to their creator, or a cipher for an unseen recipient. The recurring discoveries, bizarre placement, and incomprehensible emblems suggested a ritualistic intent, a chilling offering or a macabre declaration of ownership. The source, though unspoken, was implicitly understood, products of Rosalia's tireless needle, imbued with a purpose far more sinister than mere decoration, perhaps a premonition of fates yet to unfold. The chilling atmosphere around the Ventrell mansion soon bled into human tragedy, transforming neighborhood unease into outright terror. Between 1895 and 1901, a wave of child disappearances swept through neighborhoods surrounding the mansion, casting profound fear over New Orleans. Victims, predominantly young, ranged from 5 to 10 years old, a vulnerable and cherished demographic. A disturbing pattern emerged from meticulous police reports and frantic families' testimonies. Many vanished children were last seen playing near or walking past the Ventrell property, perhaps drawn by curiosity or unfortunate coincidence. The connection, though circumstantial and lacking direct evidence, was too frequent, too statistically improbable to ignore, fostering pervasive, unspoken suspicion. Local authorities, under immense public pressure and growing panic, launched extensive searches, mobilizing every available resource, often to no avail. The children simply vanished, leaving only the echoing silence of their absence and the profound, unyielding grief of their families, a gaping wound in the community's heart. Then, as inexplicably as they had disappeared, some children began to reappear. They were found wandering city streets, often miles from where last seen, disoriented and profoundly altered. Their physical state was generally unharmed. No signs of physical abuse, struggle, or visible scars. But their minds bore an invisible, devastating scar. They were lucid, yet strangely vacant, their eyes holding a distant, unfocused gaze that looked through the world. When questioned about their ordeal, their responses were fragmented, nonsensical, or entirely absent, as if memory had been surgically excised. Their memories of the intervening period seemed meticulously erased, a crucial chapter unwritten, leaving profound, unsettling blankness. They spoke of no captors, no experiences, no passage of time, only a profound void. This psychological trauma, more terrifying than physical injury, suggested a calculated, deliberate act, a violation not of body, but of their very essence, stripping away identity and past. The children were returned, but not whole. They were ghosts of their former selves, living testaments to unspeakable horror. The terror culminated with the letter's arrival, an act of calculated cruelty that left no room for doubt regarding the malevolence at play. These were not official documents or ransom notes. They were personal, insidious communications, delivered surreptitiously to families whose children had either vanished entirely or returned memory erased. Each thick, cream-colored envelope bore no return address, sealed with a wax impression of a twisted, stylized cross, mimicking the mansion's askew crucifixes. Inside, contents were sparse but horrifying, designed for maximum psychological torment. A single, intricately folded square of fine fabric, often silk or velvet, contained a chilling collection. A lock of hair, unmistakably the child's, its color and texture matching perfectly, a tangible piece of lost innocence, and a button, sometimes from a familiar garment, sometimes an antique, ornate piece of undeniable significance. And always meticulously embroidered onto the fabric square, using Rosalia's precise, unnerving stitch work, was a single enigmatic phrase, rendered in elegant, almost flowing script. The echo on the walls isn't echo. The house don't forget what's given. The letters were not threats. They were statements, declarations of possession of a dark transaction completed, an acknowledgement of a debt paid or tribute received. They spoke of the house not as an inert structure, but as a living, sentient entity, a silent accomplice or primary orchestrator of the horrors befalling New Orleans children. The final phrase resonated with chilling implication, suggesting ritualistic sacrifice, a dark bargain between the Ventrell mansion and an unseen, insatiable hunger feeding on innocence. Community fear solidified, transforming from vague apprehension into palpable, pervasive dread. The Ventrell house was not merely where evil resided. It was evil itself, a silent, watchful predator, its foundations built on secrets, its walls imbued with victims' silent screams, a monstrous entity lurking in plain sight. The house on Esplanade Avenue, a decrepit sentinel draped in Spanish moss, stood as a monument to forgotten time and unspeakable secrets. Its peeling paint and crumbling wrought iron balconies whispered tales of past grandeur, now replaced by an oppressive stillness. Within its decaying walls, Rosalia's craft transcended tailoring. It was a devotion, a relentless, ritualistic endeavor that consumed her. What began as an occupation had insidiously transformed into something far more sinister. A penance for an unknown sin, a desperate sealing of unnameable horror, or a macabre ritual whose purpose remained obscure. Her needles, once simple instruments, became conduits for an obsession that warped reality, extending into the house itself. The threads she meticulously wove seemed to bind a malevolent presence, or contain it within her creations. The silence of her labor was broken only by the rhythmic click of the needle against thimble, a chilling, hypnotic sound. The true chilling nature of Rosalia's work emerged not in the innocuous finished garments, but in the hidden, disturbing details embedded within their fabric. Each piece, from child's baptismal gowns to nursery quilts, was an artifact of a deeply disturbed mind, bearing witness to profound darkness. Concealed within linings, stitched into hems with microscopic precision, or subtly woven into the main design, were elements that defied rational explanation, screaming of deliberate malevolence. Investigators years later discovered embroidery stitched in reverse, patterns decipherable only with a mirror or from an oblique angle, suggesting a deliberate inversion of purpose. These were not errors but intentional, painstaking efforts to embed a hidden language, a horrifying liturgy unfolding stitch by stitch. The fabric itself, when examined closely, seemed to absorb light, appearing duller, heavier, saturated with an unseen weight. More unsettling were the symbols, pushing the horror beyond psychological aberration into the archaic. Scattered throughout the intricate needlework, sometimes integrated into floral motifs, sometimes stark and isolated, were archaic glyphs and sigils. These were not comforting symbols of domesticity or faith, but disturbing, primeval marks lifted from obscure medieval texts on demonology, grim grimoires, or ancient necromancy. They were often associated with containment, warding off malevolent spirits, or, most chillingly, the binding of curses and hostile entities. Experts in forgotten lore spoke of an ancient, grim tradition, sealing malevolence not just from a place, but within an object or even a living being. Rosalia's stitches, therefore, were not merely decorative. They were a complex, sacred geometry, intended to ensnare or mollify an unseen force, or perhaps to perpetuate its existence. The very act of sewing became an incantation, each stitch a syllable in a silent, unending prayer or curse, a desperate attempt to exert control over something vast and terrible. The threads themselves, often dyed in muted, earthy tones, seemed to possess an unnatural resilience, imbued with their dark purpose. But the most profoundly disturbing discovery, shattering any remaining pretense of mere eccentricity, was the presence of names. Interwoven with the inverted patterns and ancient symbols, sometimes in a slightly different hue, sometimes almost imperceptible, were sequences of letters forming recognizable names. These were not family members or patrons, but names, meticulously cross-referenced against police records, of children who had vanished from New Orleans and its surrounding parishes over several decades. Small children, often from impoverished families, whose disappearances had remained cold cases, unsolved mysteries that haunted the city's collective memory. The sheer volume of these names, the careful, almost reverent way they were incorporated into Rosalia's macabre tapestry, suggested not a casual notation, but a profound, horrifying connection, a grim ledger of lives extinguished or appropriated. Were these children victims? A record of terrible deeds, a confession whispered in thread? Or were they, in Rosalia's twisted reality, merely components in her grand, terrible design, their identities serving as anchors in her ritualistic fabric, their essence somehow captured within the very fibers? The implications were too ghastly to fully comprehend, yet undeniably present in every thread, a silent scream woven into the cloth. The revelation of these details, unearthed painstakingly over years from the decaying remnants of Rosalia's life work, sparked a series of desperate and dangerous investigations. The case, initially dismissed as the tragic eccentricity of an isolated recluse, quickly escalated into something far more disturbing, attracting local law enforcement, federal agencies, theological scholars, folklorists specializing in regional occult practices, and private occult investigators drawn by whispers of a pervasive, ancient evil emanating from the house. Yet, every attempt to penetrate the veil of mystery surrounding Rosalia's house and her dark craft met with inexplicable, often terrifying resistance. It was as if the very air around the property was imbued with a protective malevolence, an unseen guard dog that snarled and bit at anyone who dared to scratch beneath the surface, ensuring its secrets remained inviolable. The house itself seemed to resist intrusion, its doors jamming, its windows refusing to open, as if physical space itself conspired against inquiry. The patterns of misfortune that befell those who delved too deeply were too consistent, too eerily similar, to be dismissed as mere coincidence or stress-induced delusion. Father Michael Cormick, a Jesuit priest known for his sharp intellect, unshakable faith, and extensive knowledge of exorcism rites, was among the first to examine the case files with a theological lens, convinced that elements of genuine diabolical influence were at play. He spent weeks poring over the evidence, meticulously documenting the symbols, attempting to decipher their origins and meanings, his initial academic curiosity slowly giving way to a profound, unsettling dread. Then abruptly his work ceased. He was found wandering the cobbled streets of the French Quarter, disoriented and muttering in a language no one recognized, a guttural, archaic tongue, his memory of the Rosalia case entirely erased, replaced by a vacant stare. Diagnosed with a sudden, severe onset of atypical dementia, he spent the remainder of his days in a state of confused agitation, his once brilliant mind reduced to a fractured mosaic of forgotten thoughts, his faith seemingly shattered. His colleagues spoke of a man utterly broken, not by age or disease, but by something unseen, something that had reached into his very consciousness and simply excised a portion of his being, leaving a void. Similar, equally devastating fates awaited others. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a meticulous forensic psychologist brought in to construct a psychological profile of Rosalia and understand the motivations behind her macabre artistry, began her work with detached academic rigor. Within days of immersing herself in the pervasive details of the sewings and the chilling implications of the missing children's names, she developed an acute, debilitating paranoia that spiraled into full-blown psychosis. She reported feeling constantly watched, hearing whispers emanating from the silent evidence boxes stacked in her office, and seeing fleeting, shadowy figures in her peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight. Her once rational mind descended into a maelstrom of terror, culminating in a violent, public outburst where she accused her colleagues of conspiring against her, of attempting to seal her away within a metaphorical prison of their own making. She was institutionalized, her professional reputation shattered, her sanity irretrievably lost to the same inexplicable dread that had consumed Father Cormac. Her case notes, once pristine and analytical, became rambling, illegible scrawls, filled with frantic drawings of inverted stitches and distorted, menacing symbols, as if the very patterns had imprinted themselves upon her psyche. Perhaps most chilling were the outright disappearances, which left no trace, no body, only an echoing void. Detective Marcus Thorne, a veteran homicide investigator with a reputation for unwavering tenacity and a grim determination to bring justice to the forgotten, took a personal interest in the missing children aspect of the Rosalia case. He spent months re-interviewing old witnesses, tracing cold leads through the labyrinthine streets of New Orleans, and meticulously cross-referencing every name found in the sewings, with archived missing persons reports, often working late into the night, consumed by the grim puzzle. One evening, after expressing frustration to a colleague about a particularly obscure symbol he believed held the key to the entire mystery, and a growing sense that he was getting too close, he simply vanished without a trace. His unmarked car was found abandoned blocks from his home, meticulously parked, his apartment impeccably clean, with no signs of forced entry, struggle, or even a disturbance. No note, no message, no farewell. His case remains unsolved, a ghost among the city's countless forgotten souls, adding yet another name to the chilling, ever-growing list of those who sought to unravel Rosalia's secrets. The official police investigation concluded with no leads, only the unsettling realization that anyone who truly pressed against the boundaries of this particular mystery seemed to be consumed by it, swallowed whole by an unseen abyss. These repeated, inexplicable occurrences forged a terrifying consensus among the remaining investigators, those who observed from a cautious distance, too wary to approach directly. Rosalia's house was not merely a crime scene, it was an active entity, a nexus of malevolent influence that permeated its surroundings. The forces at play were not conventional, nor were they easily quantifiable by scientific or forensic methods. They operated with a silent, insidious efficiency, targeting the minds and memories of those who dared to intrude, systematically eroding their sanity, or simply erasing them from existence, leaving behind only questions and a profound sense of horror. It was as if Rosalia's sewings had woven not just fabric, but a protective shroud of dread around her dark enterprise, a living, breathing barrier that repelled inquiry through psychological assault and unexplained vanishing acts. The house itself seemed to pulse with this unseen power, its very atmosphere thick with an oppressive, watchful presence that weighed heavily on the soul, ensuring that the morbid silence within remained undisturbed. The escalating pattern of these events painted a grim, undeniable picture. Each failed investigation, each vanished person, each mind shattered, served not as a deterrent but as an ominous prophecy, a chilling premonition of what awaited anyone who dared to persist. The deeper the probe, the more potent the resistance became, a clear and present danger to intellect and life itself. The malignant protective force was not abstract. It was demonstrably real in its devastating effects, a silent, patient predator, allowing investigators to draw close enough to grasp the enormity of the horror before striking, ensuring that the true nature of Rosalia's activities remained shrouded in an impenetrable, terrifying mystery. The chilling whispers of Esplanade Avenue grew louder, carried on the humid New Orleans air. The air around Rosalia's derelict home thickened with an almost palpable sense of impending doom, a suffocating dread that clung to the Spanish moss and seeped into the very foundations of the city. The chilling meticulousness of her craft, the unspeakable implications of the names woven into her morbid tapestries, and the consistent horrifying fate of those who dared to investigate, all converged to a single, terrifying conclusion. Something immense, something unspeakably dark, had been nurtured within those walls for decades, growing in strength, drawing sustenance from hidden sources. The sewings were not merely a record of past atrocities, they were an ongoing ritual, a continuous act of containment or perhaps creation, a slow, deliberate gestation. And now, after years of silent operation, The threads of this macabre design seemed to be drawing taut, reaching a breaking point. The resistance encountered by investigators was not merely defensive. It felt like a final, desperate act of preparation, a clearing of the path before a grand, terrible unveiling. The stage was set. The long, slow build-up of dread had reached its zenith, the atmosphere pregnant with unspoken terror. The malignant force, whatever it truly was, had been disturbed, and its manifestation, its terrible unveiling, felt not just possible, but tragically, horrifyingly inevitable. The quiet horror of Rosalia's house was about to erupt, its carefully maintained secrets poised to spill forth in a cataclysmic revelation, forever scarring the shadowed heart of New Orleans. The threads were tied, the final knot beckoned, and the darkness, long contained, was about to break free, its hunger finally sated. The year 1901 was etched into the annals of New Orleans lore not for any grand civic event or natural disaster, but for a private, chilling rupture within the Ventrell household that resonated far beyond the confines of their decaying mansion. It was in the suffocating embrace of a humid August morning that Pietro Ventrell, the enigmatic patriarch, was discovered. His body lay not in the comfort of his marital bed, nor in any of the bustling common areas, but in a seldom utilized antechamber, a space that served as a transitional void between the grand parlor and a rarely opened study. The room, typically cloaked in shadows and the scent of disuse, offered no immediate clues of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no shattered porcelain. The silence that greeted the discovery was profound, almost a premonition of the deeper quiet that would soon envelop the house. Pietro's form was rigid, his features composed in a manner that defied the circumstances of his demise. Yet the undeniable evidence of foul play, or at the very least, a deeply unsettling event, was starkly visible. Deep, purplish contusions, the unmistakable marks of ligatures, encircled both wrists. The skin was broken in places, raw and abraded, suggesting a desperate, albeit silent, struggle against unseen bonds. This was not the mark of a sudden illness or a peaceful passing. It was the signature of restraint, of an imposed stillness. The precise nature of these bindings, their material, and the duration of their application remained an impenetrable mystery, adding another layer to the already dense shroud of secrets that clung to the Ventrell name. The authorities, when eventually summoned, found themselves confronted with an absence of clear narrative, a void that Rosalia Ventrell, Pietro's widow, seemed disinclined to fill. Her demeanor was one of disquieting composure, a stoicism that bordered on indifference, further compounding the enigma of Pietro's final hours. The subsequent handling of Pietro Ventrell's remains deviated so drastically from the deeply ingrained traditions of New Orleans society that it immediately ignited a conflagration of rumor and speculation. There was no period of lying in state, no solemn procession, no public wake where neighbors and acquaintances could pay their respects. Instead, Rosalia orchestrated a burial of unprecedented haste and secrecy. Pietro was interred not in the hallowed ground of a Catholic cemetery, nor in the ornate crypts that dotted the city's necropolises, but within the very confines of the Ventrell property itself. A shallow grave, hastily excavated, was dug in the overgrown rear garden, beneath the sprawling, gnarled roots of an ancient live oak whose branches dripped with Spanish moss. The earth, still sodden from the pervasive summer rains, seemed to absorb the coffin with an unnatural eagerness, as if the very soil conspired in the rapid effacement of Pietro's existence. The entire process was completed with a disturbing lack of ceremony, observed only by a handful of trusted, if taciturn, household staff. This clandestine interment, devoid of eulogy or communal mourning, was an act of profound isolation, severing Pietro not only from the world of the living but from the very possibility of conventional remembrance. It was a deliberate erasure, a final, definitive severing that spoke volumes about Rosalia's intent, yet articulated nothing concrete about the events that necessitated such a drastic measure. The act itself was deemed an affront to custom, a silent declaration of a truth too terrible to be spoken aloud. Rosalia Ventrell's immediate reaction to her husband's death was not one of conventional sorrow. There were no public displays of grief, no outward expressions of despair that might be expected from a recently widowed woman, particularly one of her societal standing. Instead, her actions were precise, deliberate, and imbued with an unsettling, almost ritualistic purpose. The room Pietro had occupied, a chamber on the second floor overlooking the sprawling live oaks and the city beyond, was immediately subjected to a process of methodical, almost desperate, containment. The heavy mahogany door, a relic of the house's original grandeur, was not merely locked with its ornate brass key, it was reinforced from the outside. Thick, hand-forged iron bolts, typically reserved for securing external gates, were affixed with brutal efficiency, driven deep into the doorframe, effectively sealing the chamber as if it were a tomb. This was not a measure to preserve a memory, it was an act of profound, almost frantic imprisonment. Then came the sealing of the chimney. This was not a simple blockage of a disused flue but a painstaking, almost devotional endeavor. Rosalia, demonstrating an uncharacteristic physical exertion for a woman of her delicate constitution, began to haul stones, not uniform bricks, but a disparate collection of river stones smoothed by countless currents, jagged fragments of old masonry unearthed from the garden, and pieces of broken, reclaimed slate. Each stone was chosen with care, its texture and origin seemingly imbued with a specific esoteric significance. With a grim determination, she meticulously, painstakingly, mortared them into the opening of the chimney flue within Pietro's now sealed chamber. The mortar, thick and uneven, was applied with an almost desperate urgency, creating an impenetrable barrier. The act itself was less about preventing drafts or securing warmth and more about an act of profound suppression, an attempt to seal off an egress, to trap something within or perhaps, to prevent something from escaping. It was a physical manifestation of an internal terror, a desperate attempt to contain an unseen malevolence, to sever a connection that she believed persisted beyond the veil of death. Observers, few as they were and kept at a distance by Rosalia's chilling resolve, described the process as a form of architectural exorcism, a desperate attempt to contain a force she perceived as active, present, and dangerous. The house, through Rosalia's actions, was being transformed into a vessel of confinement, a mausoleum not just for a man but for a secret. It was following this event, this death and its subsequent sealing, that the Ventrell residence, once a house of quiet mysteries and hushed rumors, began its true horrifying transformation. What had previously been attributed to the eccentricities of its reclusive owner or the natural decay of an old New Orleans mansion now began to manifest with a terrifying, palpable agency. The deterioration was no longer merely structural, though the neglect was evident in the peeling paint, the crumbling plaster, and the pervasive scent of damp and decay. It was an intrinsic decay, a malevolent blossoming that seemed to emanate from within the very stones and timbers of the house, infecting its very atmosphere. The house ceased to be a passive backdrop to Rosalia's reclusion. It became an active participant in her unfolding horror. The ceilings, particularly in the rooms adjacent to Pietro's sealed chamber, began to exhibit peculiar and deeply disturbing discolorations. These were not the common water stains of a leaky roof, nor the faded marks of time and neglect. They were organic, spreading forms, coalescing into shapes that, to the horrified eye, bore an unsettling, undeniable resemblance to human figures. Some were elongated, as if stretching or reaching from within the plaster. Others were compact and contorted, almost fetal, seeming to writhe within the very fabric of the ceiling. They appeared slowly, incrementally, like a developing photograph, their hues shifting from a faint, sickly sepia to an ominous, deep ochre, sometimes even tinged with a disturbing reddish-brown reminiscent of dried blood. These were not random patterns. They possessed a disturbing anatomical suggestion, hinting at limbs and torsos, at faces obscured by shadow, as if the very house were absorbing or extruding the imprint of something once corporeal, something that continued to press against the boundaries of its confinement. The stains expanded, contracted, and sometimes seemed to deepen in color with the changing light, creating a chilling illusion of movement, a permanent, silent agony etched into the very architecture. Then came the fires. Spontaneous combustion, a phenomenon often attributed to faulty wiring or neglected gas lines, became a recurring horror within the Ventrell walls. Yet the fires were not random nor were they widespread. They erupted with a chilling precision in specific isolated areas, almost with a malevolent intent. A sudden, inexplicable blaze would consume a drapery in the master bedroom, leaving the adjacent furniture untouched, the flames licking hungrily at the fabric before abruptly diminishing to nothing more than a wisp of smoke. A small, intense conflagration would erupt on a single isolated floorboard in the library, leaving a perfectly circular char mark, as if a branding iron had been pressed into the wood, before extinguishing itself just as abruptly, leaving behind only the acrid scent of burnt timber and an unsettling, unnatural silence. There was no logical explanation for their origin, no discernible accelerant, no faulty electrical systems that could account for such localized, self-contained bursts of destructive energy. They were manifestations of an internal pressure, a destructive force struggling for release, contained yet volatile, like a feverish entity attempting to purge itself, or perhaps, to communicate its torment through the only means available to it. Each incident left behind not just physical damage, but an indelible mark of dread, a deepening conviction that the house was no longer merely a structure. But perhaps the most unnerving manifestation, the one that truly transcended the boundaries of the Ventrell property and intruded upon the collective consciousness of the neighborhood with a creeping, insidious dread, were the seams. They began to appear on the curtains of neighboring houses, inexplicable lines of stitching that materialized overnight, as if sewn by invisible hands. These were not the fine, delicate stitches of a professional seamstress. They were coarse, uneven, and utterly without practical purpose. They appeared on pristine lace, on heavy velvet, on the simple cotton drapes of bungalows across the street, sometimes even on the more robust canvas awnings. A neighbor would awaken to find a crude, zigzagging line of black thread across their kitchen curtain, a line that had definitively not been there the night before. Another would discover a series of tight, almost surgical sutures running down the length of their bedroom window treatment, as if a tear had been clumsily, desperately mended by an unseen, frantic hand. The threads themselves were of varying colors and textures, some coarse burlap, others fine silk, yet all bore the hallmark of a frantic, almost desperate mending or perhaps a binding. They were not vandalism. They were too precise in their inexplicable nature, too pervasive, appearing simultaneously on multiple properties across a wide area. They suggested a force attempting to repair, to hold together, or perhaps, to bind something that was tearing apart, not within the Ventrell house itself, but across the very fabric of the neighborhood, as if the reality of the surrounding world was itself fraying, and this unseen entity was attempting to stitch it back together, or conversely, to stitch its own horror into the everyday. It was as if the internal ruptures of the mansion, the unseen agonies within its walls, were bleeding outwards, stitching themselves onto the unsuspecting world, a chilling, material manifestation of an unseen influence. The seams were a silent, undeniable testament to the house's expanding dominion, a physical signature of its malevolent reach. The Ventrell residence, once a grand but enigmatic structure, had ceased to be merely a house in the conventional sense. With Pietro's death and Rosalia's desperate, ritualistic acts of containment, it had undergone a profound and horrifying metamorphosis. It was no longer a passive container of secrets, but an active, malevolent entity, a living monument to an unspoken dread. The human-shaped stains on the ceilings were its grotesque visages, the spontaneous fires its feverish breath, and the inexplicable seams on the neighbors' curtains were its tendrils, reaching out, weaving its terror into the mundane lives of those unfortunate enough to live within its ever-expanding shadow. The secrets of Rosalia Ventrell, once confined to the suffocating silence of her own mind and the oppressive walls of her home, were now manifesting palpably, undeniably, threatening to unravel the very composure and sanity of the world outside its decaying walls. The house had become a living testament to an unspeakable horror, a testament that unfolded daily, stitch by terrifying stitch, char mark by chilling char mark, a silent, pervasive declaration of its newfound, terrifying sentience. This was not merely a house, it was a wound, festering and spreading, and its true nature was only just beginning to reveal itself. The Ventrell case, a name whispered in New Orleans, did not conclude with its initial, documented horrors. Its true terror, a malevolent entity unfurled for decades, seeping into reality beyond the Gothic mansion that birthed its infamy. The Ventrell legacy was a perpetual ritualistic stain, stitched with invisible threads into the city's unseen tapestry, an ancient, profound evil defying containment by mortality, physical destruction, or time. It was a wound that refused to heal, festering quietly beneath the veneer of normalcy, its putrid essence permeating everything it touched. From 1923 until 1949, the Ventrell mansion stood as a grotesque monument, a decaying sentinel of unspeakable acts. Its facade, a festering wound on the landscape, embodied the profound malevolence it once housed, casting an oppressive shadow. Demolition attempts, hoping to erase its blight, met preternatural resistance, as if the stones were sentient, malevolent guardians. Contractors reported an overwhelming dread that clung to them, a pervasive sense of being unwelcome. This was no mere structural challenge. It was an active, sentient opposition, a battle waged against an unseen, potent force. Tools malfunctioned inexplicably with malicious precision. Engines sputtered and died mid-roar, hydraulic systems seized without warning, and blades shattered against plaster as if striking an impenetrable barrier. Workers experienced debilitating nausea, disorienting vertigo, and a profound, soul-crushing disorientation, abandoning tasks and fleeing in terror. Many felt a bone-chilling cold piercing their marrow, even in the sweltering Louisiana heat, accompanied by unnerving unseen surveillance. The ground itself resisted disruption, vibrating strangely underfoot. Each swing of a wrecking ball felt less like demolition and more like a futile, agonizing assault on a living, monstrous entity. The air around the house grew heavy, thick with unseen pressure, and faint, indistinct whispers drifted on the breeze. During prolonged demolition efforts, particularly in the late 1930s, after years of failed attempts, the horrifying depth of ventral depravity began to emerge. As inner walls, stubbornly refusing to yield, were finally breached, secret compartments were revealed. These were not crude hiding spots but meticulously concealed cavities, built into the very bones of the house with obsessive, ritualistic precision. The air within these newly exposed voids was thick with a cloying, sickly sweet scent of decay, a nauseating miasma that clung to clothes and skin for days, permeating the senses and haunting memories, a stench hinting at both organic decomposition and something far more unnatural. The contents of these hidden recesses defied rational explanation, plunging investigators into a deeper abyss of horror. Within these meticulously crafted, often disturbingly child-sized recesses, lay artifacts of unspeakable depravity. Small, brittle bones, unmistakably human and belonging to infants and young children, were discovered, not haphazardly discarded, but carefully arranged as macabre, ritualistic displays. Their sheer number, scattered throughout the house's hidden cavities, dwarfed initial estimations, suggesting a horrifying scale of atrocities that chilled even the most hardened forensic specialists. Alongside these remains lay bundles of intricately stitched, unervingly small clothing, crafted from disparate, often luxurious fabrics. The craftsmanship was exquisite, a grotesque parody of loving care. Closer inspection revealed a chilling detail. Some threads, particularly those for delicate embroidery, possessed an unnatural sheen, unsettling elasticity and resilience. Forensic analysis confirmed the horrifying truth. Some filaments were human, meticulously processed and incorporated into the very fabric of these tiny garments. The implication hinted at a depravity beyond mere murder. It suggested a ritualistic harvesting of human remains, a grotesque fusion of victim and artifact, weaving the essence of the dead into the very objects that would contain their memory. Hundreds of needles, from the finest embroidery to robust upholstery, were also found, many still threaded with the grotesque human fiber. They lay alongside small, intricately carved wooden figurines, their features distorted into expressions of agony or despair, their tiny limbs often bound with the same human-spun thread. Dried, unidentifiable organic matter, dark and viscous, crumbled to dust, leaving a faint, metallic odor, like old blood mixed with something unnatural. The walls themselves, especially near these sinister compartments, seemed remended, disparate sections painstakingly joined, creating a patchwork of stone, plaster, and organic-like materials that pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy, almost as if the house itself were a living, monstrous entity, its wounds crudely stitched closed, holding within its very core the echoing screams of its victims. Despite overwhelming evidence of unspeakable crimes, no formal confession was ever obtained from any Ventrell family member. Their silence was as impenetrable as the darkness that clung to the house, a chilling refusal to acknowledge the horrors they had wrought. The full extent of their ritualistic practices, the insidious why behind such acts of depravity, remained shrouded in an impenetrable darkness, a mystery that gnawed relentlessly at the sanity of all who dared to confront it. The discoveries, instead of providing closure, only deepened the enigma. Desperate to purge the mansion's oppressive, malevolent presence, the city intensified demolition efforts. By 1949, after years of relentless struggle, the last vestiges of the Ventrell house were finally reduced to rubble, the ground churned and supposedly purified. Yet, the destruction of the physical structure could not, sever the invisible, malevolent threads of horror the Ventrells had so meticulously woven into the very fabric of reality. The phenomena persisted, manifesting subtly at first, then with increasing frequency and malevolence, rippling across New Orleans like a contagion. Objects connected to the investigations mysteriously disappeared from secure, locked locations, only to reappear in impossible places. A detective's badge inside a sealed book or crucial evidence on a high shelf, or vanishing entirely. Evidential items, particularly the horrifying human filament cloth samples, were frequent casualties, making any attempt to compile a definitive archive futile. Personal effects of investigators, official documents and photographic negatives inexplicably vanished from locked offices and secure vaults, defying all security protocols, as if an unseen, malicious hand actively erased the official record, ensuring the truth remained elusive, fragmented, and perpetually out of reach. The very air in these offices would sometimes grow cold, carrying a faint, sweet scent of decay, a chilling reminder of the entity's pervasive influence. More terrifying, perhaps, were the profound psychological repercussions experienced by those directly linked to the case, a spiritual corrosion that ate away at their very souls. Many police officers, forensic specialists, and city personnel, years after their involvement, developed severe mental disturbances that defied medical explanation. Insomnia became chronic, their nights plagued by vivid, horrifying nightmares of tiny, brittle bones, impossible, grotesque stitches, and the chilling, distant cries of children. Chronic paranoia settled in, a pervasive, suffocating sense of being watched, that drove them to isolate themselves. Several suffered complete nervous breakdowns, their minds shattering under the weight of the unspeakable. One retired detective, haunted by children's bones and human-stitched fabrics, spent his final years meticulously stitching his own clothes with strands of his hair, muttering incessantly about keeping the threads together, convinced his being would unravel. He was found dead, surrounded by his peculiar needlework, his face frozen in profound terror. The city architect who oversaw the demolition became obsessed with patched reality, convinced the world was a fragile, crudely mended construct. He would draw intricate diagrams of seams and stitches across maps of the city, whispering about thin places where the mending might fail. He was eventually institutionalized, his ramblings dismissed as madness, yet his words resonated with chilling truth for those few who witnessed the house's unnatural nature. The psychological toll was a deep, spiritual corrosion, infecting their souls, twisting their perceptions, and binding them eternally to the Ventrell horror. Attempts to officially record the Ventrell case history were frustrated by persistent, malevolent interference that seemed to emanate from an unseen, intelligent source. Archival systems inexplicably crashed at critical moments, digital files corrupted, often displaying garbled text or fleeting, skeletal figures before black screens, only to return to normal once the attempt to access Ventrell data ceased. Physical documents disappeared from secure, fireproof vaults, leaving no trace of forced entry. Entire case files, meticulously compiled over years, vanished overnight, leaving only empty folders or a faint, lingering scent of decay, a ghostly signature of the entity's passage. It was as if a malevolent force actively resisted the formalization of the narrative, ensuring its essence remained an uncontainable whisper of terror, perpetually beyond grasp. Even the land itself remained cursed, a perpetual scar on the urban landscape. Despite complete demolition and redevelopment, no new structure built on the site thrived. Homes constructed on the former Ventrell grounds invariably stood vacant within months, their new owners fleeing in terror. Residents fled, often without explanation, abandoning all belongings with a primal urgency. Their reasons, when articulated, included an unbearable sense of oppression, constant unseen surveillance, inexplicable pockets of bone-chilling cold, or the faint, distant, yet utterly heartbreaking sounds of children weeping from within the very walls, driving them inexorably towards madness. One particularly harrowing account emerged from Eleanor Vance, a young, optimistic woman who briefly occupied a charming bungalow on the former Ventrell grounds in the late 1980s. She spoke of relentless torment that began subtly and escalated with terrifying speed. Objects rearranged, faint, disembodied whispers, a persistent, cloying scent of decay, and the chilling sensation of unseen hands brushing against her skin. The terror escalated until one night, she awoke to a profound, paralyzing dread, an invisible, crushing weight pressing down upon her chest, stealing her breath. She lay in suffocating darkness, consumed by an icy dread, feeling utterly possessed, her own body no longer her own. The presence was undeniable, suffocating, a malevolent entity that seemed to seep into her very being. The experience lasted for what felt like an eternity, a waking nightmare of utter helplessness. The next morning, fueled by a primal, desperate instinct for escape, Eleanor fled, leaving everything behind without a second thought, driven only by the desperate need to put distance between herself and that cursed place. Days later, safe but still deeply traumatized, Eleanor discovered the chilling, final testament to her ordeal. As she showered, scrubbing frantically at her skin, she noticed a strange, raised pattern on her forearm. It was not a rash, bruise, or bite mark. Under the harsh light, her blood ran cold. There, beneath her skin, subtly visible as if stitched from within, were faint, raised lines, forming a single, unmistakable word: stay. The letters were a perfect, unsettling embroidery, part of her very flesh, a permanent, grotesque tattoo that pulsed with unseen malevolence, a phantom ache that resonated with the lingering terror in her soul. The experience, confirmed by bewildered medical professionals who offered no logical explanation, solidified the horrifying truth. The dark legacy of the Ventrells transcended the physical existence of the house. It was not merely a place of horror but a malevolent, enduring force, a continuous, ritualistic mystery, unburdened by formal confession or physical destruction, yet leaving a perpetual trail of terror stitched into reality, and now into human flesh itself. The curse was not broken, it had merely found new, more intimate avenues of expression, an eternal tapestry of evil binding the living to its unspeakable past, a reminder that some horrors, once unleashed, can never truly be contained. Leaving New Orleans, it's not just the music or the architecture that lingers. It's the profound sense that this city, like so many places marked by time and struggle, holds stories within its very breath. These aren't just historical events. They are the quiet, authentic human dramas playing out every day, the resilience stitched into the fabric of its streets, the complex beauty of a spirit that endures despite everything. It's a powerful reminder that our personal narratives are often inseparable from the places we call home, and that even in the most challenging circumstances, the human heart finds a way to beat on, to adapt, to find new rhythms. It makes you consider, how deeply do the echoes of a place truly shape who we become? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How do you think our environments, like a city, influence the untold stories within us? Share your reflections in the comments below. Your insights mean the world to us. And if you've connected with this journey, please take a moment to subscribe and join our community. We'll be bringing you more authentic human stories from around the world.